It's the 1954 World Cup Final. It's the first to be televised properly, and the winning team are doped up on methamphetamine. Or those who claim this, including the star striker of the losing side, are doped up on their own delusions. Did the West German team dope up on performance-enhancing drugs, on methamphetamine of all things? And where do these allegations come from? World Cup finals have delivered some memorable moments: Baggio's penalty miss, Zidane's headbutt and red card, Hurst's infamous ghost goal bouncing on or just over the goal line. But the most salacious is still the one from all the way back from 1954. The first World Cup held in Europe after World War II, the meeting between Hungary and West Germany in Bern, a match between a capitalist and a communist nation at the height of the Cold War. After the match, rumours slowly trickled out that the West German team had been given some sort of stimulant or performance-enhancing substance. Ferenc Puskás, the captain of Hungary, and whom the national stadium in Budapest is named after — he scored 3 times in 15 minutes in a European Cup final, after all — claimed that he'd seen the West German players vomiting in their changing room after the match, and played with what he felt was an unnatural level of energy. Nevertheless, these were rumours and were not supported by many people until the 2000s, with the release of statements by several players and the team's doctor, and research conducted by the German Federal Institute of Sports Science on doping in Germany in the mid-20th century, all of which we'll get into in a few moments. But in the immediate aftermath of the match, the evidence to Puskás and others was the bigger picture. As I discussed in the last video, the 1954 World Cup Final was, to date, the greatest upset in the latter stages of a World Cup, certainly a semi-final or final. Hungary's mighty Magyars had been unbeaten for 4 years and were absolutely demolishing the teams. 7-1 and 6-3 against England pre-tournament, 9-0 against South Korea and 8-3 against West Germany in the group stage, and 4-2 against both Brazil and world champions Uruguay in the quarters and semis respectively. And they played West Germany again in the final, but somehow lost. A game that they had started in typical fashion, creating a clear 2-0 lead after just 10 minutes. It was West Germany's first World Cup since the war, having only been readmitted to FIFA after the 1950 World Cup had taken place. The Golden Team of Hungary, still the greatest of all time according to most ELO rankings, were all-season professionals, whereas the West German team was still semi-professionals, with the German Professional League yet to be created, and had only played 18 international games since the end of the war. The scorer of the winning goal, Helmut Rahn, worked in a furniture business alongside his football career. Aside from this, there wasn't much else to fuel such suspicions apart from the heartbreak and shock of the result, until over the following playing season a staggering 8 of the winning West German team fell ill with jaundice, requiring weeks or months off. The winger Richard Hermann died of cirrhosis just 8 years later at 39. Why would they all come down with the same illness around the same time? The outbreak was attributed to infectious hepatitis through medical treatment during the tournament, likely injections, with disposable needles and sterilization not being as effective as today, but there wasn't much debate about what the injections were. The denial confirmed the suspicions of those that had them, and the explanation confirmed for everyone else that nothing was untoward. Puskás himself was forced to write a written apology to the German footballing authorities some years later. For half a century, the main understanding was that players, if they had received injections, had been injected with glucose or some other nutrients, or for personal individual medical treatment. But that changed and the doping allegations took off when in 2004, the team's doctor, Franz Lurgen, publicly acknowledged in an interview with Bild that he had given injections to the players before the final, although more as a placebo than anything else. Quote, "I injected the players with vitamin C to improve their stamina. You can't measure the effects, but the players believed in it. He then added that the jaundice outbreak might have occurred because he had sterilized the needles used for the vitamin injections in an old Soviet cooker, and it simply might not have been good enough to do the job. Several of the players, now in their 70s, confirmed this but denied that it was anything other than medical and nutritional care for the players. Horst Eckel was one of them to make a public comment, saying, quote, "I'm furious that after 50 years this can be suggested. We didn't know the word doping." His teammate, Hans Schäfer, added that, quote, "The doctor did give us preparations to keep us fresh, but we didn't take drugs." As he put it in his autobiography, quote, "Every top athlete takes glucose. In our case, the doctor regulated the consumption." All of this prompted the groundsman of the Wankdorf Stadium at the time of the final, Walter Bronnemann, to come out and say that he had discovered discarded syringes under the drainage grates in the West German dressing room, but had been told not to make a big deal about it. The main supporting evidence, though, comes from the extensive research in doping in Germany from 1950 to today, an 800-page study commissioned by Germany's Federal Institute of Sports Science and the German Olympic Sports Federation. The study uncovered and delved into a sophisticated doping program in West Germany across Olympic sports for the first 2 to 3 decades of the Cold War. Initially, the doping program was set up around the start of the 1950s and had been created to find evidence disproving that anabolic steroids, testosterone, and a variety of substances and chemicals did not have performance-enhancing qualities. However, when the program was finding that the opposite was true, there was a push to quietly provide these substances to athletes. It began quite independently from similar programs in East Germany, partly as a continuation of norms and practices that had begun in the Nazi Germany period, but became its own kind of hushed-up arms race when officials and coaches worried about rumours from athletics tracks, gyms and sports pitches in East Germany. One interior minister from the time period allegedly said that our athletes should have the same conditions and services as the Eastern Bloc athletes. Erik Eggers, a sports historian from Humboldt University in Berlin, looked into the 1954 World Cup Final for the study, concluding that although it is not knowable for certain, there are strong indications that the injections were not vitamin C, and Pervitin is a strong possibility. Furthermore, the players could have been injected with it unknowingly whilst believing that they were receiving a vitamin or glucose concoction. In the Second World War, much like cocaine was added into various drinks and foods in the 19th century for energy, before it was better understood, methamphetamine was pushed in National Socialist Germany as a potential everyday medicine. It was regularly prescribed to the Wehrmacht to boost their aggression and energy levels on the battlefield, mainly under the brand name Pervitin. As such, in post-war Germany, Pervitin, the Panzer chocolate, was readily available after being mass-produced for years, and many people didn't consider its consumption that unusual. The Federal Institute of Sports Sciences report details the use of stimulants beginning in the late 1940s in club football. The year before the World Cup, the Austrian mountaineer Hermann Buhl took Pervitin while successfully ascending the world's 9th highest mountain, Nanga Parbat, in the Himalayas. As Eggers has said, quote, "What is suspicious is that these injections to German players were distributed secretly, and the only reason they became known was because those who got injected contracted jaundice. The most important indication, though, is that vitamin C is not injected. This is very unusual. They could have just eaten an orange instead." So, what's the pushback against this? First, the shock that West Germany, thrashed 8-3 in the group stage against Hungary, could just weeks later be a completely different team. However, they were, partly. If you look at the starting 11 for each team for that game, you'll find that the West German manager, Sepp Herberger, deliberately fielded a slightly weaker team for that group game, with 5 players who played in the final not playing in the group match, including the goalkeeper, Toni Turek. As astonishing as it might seem, the reasoning was that they were probably going to lose, so he wanted to rest his best players for their match against Turkey, or at least some of those players, which would likely be a decider to see who would go through to the next round. So, although it's true that the Germans had lost very badly to the Hungarians in the group stage, it isn't as strong a reflection on the teams that faced each other in the final as one might initially assume. Second, the Hungarian team were treated terribly by the state after the game, as I discussed in the last video, and Puskás wasn't 100% for the final. Puskás had received a hairline fracture of the left ankle while, ironically, playing West Germany in their group stage match, and missed both the quarter and semi-finals, and was deemed only about 80% fit to play for the final. However, one could argue that he was up to it as he scored the first goal of the final. Puskás himself was one of the main targets of vitriol after the game because he was the star striker and that he had allegedly tried to pressure the team to let him play in the final, even when he was still carrying the injury from previous rounds. So it's always possible that his allegation that the West German team had been given some performance-enhancing substance could be seen as trying to take the heat off of himself and the team. However, this holds a little less weight when we consider that some players and the team's doctor publicly acknowledged that they received or administered injections. And Puskás, who not long afterwards went to play overseas and didn't return to Hungary until after the fall of communism in East Europe, appears to have been someone who would say what he thought, so it's hard to see him making the allegations just to appease people breathing down his neck. Additionally, it had started raining before the match and continued to do so throughout the game, with the pitch already wet and a little slippery at kickoff, and becoming muddier throughout the two halves. But this wasn't too big an issue for the West Germans, on the cutting edge of 1950s sports technology. Adi Dassler, the founder of Adidas, had designed the Adidas Argentinas, for some reason called that, even though they were for the West German team. They were overall lighter and allowed for more flexibility in the foot, and theoretically, and so in practice, allowed the players to expend a little less energy. It was a mixture of leather and synthetic material, there was no toe cap, and the sole was narrower. But they also contained the first screw-in studs, also helping to keep the boot lighter. Screw-in studs can, if you have them, be replaced by longer studs, if the conditions require, which they did in Bern on July 4, 1954, and were, as such, used by the West German team for the wet conditions. Overall, a good 7 decades later, we will probably never know exactly what went down. One of the interesting things is, even if the team had been given methamphetamines, at the time, anti-doping rules and testing hadn't been established like we know it today, so it's unclear what might have happened if it were the case and had been discovered. But, like the 1954 final set the stage for much of what would happen in future World Cups, it also set the stage for a lot of future sporting events in the Cold War. An opportunity for people to claim the virtues or failings of either the free market or the state, added pressure on participants, and the shadow, whenever it was justified or it wasn't, of doping. If you haven't seen the first video on the game and its aftermath for the Hungarian team, check it out on the channel page or over here. And let us know what you think.